Good morning. I'm going to divide this presentation in three sections. First, I want to talk about what is social psychology of economic inequality. What is this field about? Then I want to talk about why we think economic inequality research has to take a closer look at the Latin American case. And by the end, I'm going to present some data that we have analyzed in Latin America with some outcomes that we are really interested in. So first, I guess most of you know this book that was published in 2009 by Wilkinson and Pickett, The Spirit Label. This was a really important book in social psychology of economic inequality because, as you can see, this is a regression line. They show how countries with more economic inequality, like in the case of the United States, have more social problems like less trust, less health, obesity, and teenager pregnancy, and so on. And the countries with less inequality, for example, Norway, Sweden, have less social problems like these ones. So this book was very influential in the line of research. It has been criticized a lot, in a few years, but it gave us an idea. It questions social psychology to start to think what is between structural inequality and social problems. What are the social mechanisms that are like in these relationships? 2 years later, Norton and Arelli published another influential article. It was very basic, the research that they did. They asked participants in the States. So if you have $100, how will you divide this $100 in 5 groups? And you can see this line here is how inequality was, like objective inequality was in the United States at that time. What is the estimation the participant made about how they divide the $100, and what was the inequality the participants wanted by that moment? It was very basic research, but also it was really influential because they show for first time what is the difference between objective inequality and perception of inequality. What is this gap? And also what is the gap between perception, objective inequality, and the inequality that people want in their societies. So from this moment, social psychologists start to go further in this idea about the difference between objective and perception of inequality. And we have been like replicating these effects in different studies, try to understand if objective inequality have a stronger or not a stronger effect and social outcome than perception of inequality. And we know by now, this is a pretty new research line, around 15 years of research, but we know by now that perception of inequality have a stronger effect on social problems, on social outcomes than objective inequality. Because people don't know, if we ask like lay people, so how much wealth do you think rich people in your country have? Or what is a Gini coefficient of your town? People don't know these numbers because we just make assumptions about the things that we see in our everyday life, in our social circles, and the place that we go every day. So we know by now that the effects of subjective inequality are stronger than objective inequality. So why is this? And this is what we try to explain in this research line. So we propose when I say we, I say the line. It's not me, We propose another thing, but this is theory, okay? So we propose 2 psychosocial mechanisms that are related with objective inequality and social outcomes. First one is social distance, because economic inequality makes signs in everyday life about status difference. You can tell, like if someone comes with a new car, with different clothes, if they did different, and so on. So people, when we see a status difference in our society, we feel like, let's say, like more far away from each other. We don't feel close to the people we relate with, because inequality makes a sign of distance to one another. And then the other social psychological mechanism is a status competition, because in societies with more inequality, the place that people have and social hierarchy is more important than in more equal societies. Because if you look, like a big gap between who you are or where you stand and where are all the other people, this make people want to like increase in social hierarchy and have a feeling of competition between one another. So we focus on the predictors of social economic inequality. We are not really focused on the outcomes. I mean, of course, we have dependent variables and we look further in these dependent variables. What we really want to see are the psychosocial mechanisms that can explain the relation between objective inequality and different social outcomes. So we're focusing on the predictors here. Okay, why we think like we should study Latin America when we study inequality. And first, I have to say, of course, I have a personal bias in this talk, on this argument. I am Costa Rican, based in a Costa Rican public university. And our research is mostly focused and try to give some answers of the social problem that we have in Costa Rica and Latin America, that are too many social problems. So we try to give society some knowledge in order that we can like implement intervention or public policies that can make us live like better. So this is Latin America. This is important for the other thing I'm going to tell you later. Latin America is divided in 4 areas. We have North America here with Mexico. This tiny land is Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. So we are not all South Americans, people often think we are all South Americans. We have some difference in the region, okay? So also, Latin America sadly, is one of the most unequal areas of the world. If we see the wealth that the top percent of the population have in comparison with the wealth that people have in the bottom 50, these gaps is pretty big, it's huge. So we are in one of the most unequal regions in the world. And just to make some context, if we look at the Gini coefficient here in the area in 2023 was around 0.29. I mean, I just looked this data from the internet. Maybe it's not like a specific estimation, but around. In Latin America, it was 0.45. So you can have an idea how extreme inequality is in the country. But on the other hand, so we have societies that are really unequal, but also people is always fighting to change society. We have like social revolts at all the time. Last weekend, it was a massive mobilization in Argentina against Milei's policies. Venezuela at the moment is one of the hot spots in the area. We also have Bolivia, and well, I can continue, talking about all the social revolt that we have all the time. Some of them are more famous than the other ones, but people is always trying to change society. But we are being really oppressed by the elites that want to maintain the status quo, how society is going now. So on one hand, we have extreme level of inequality, and the other hand, we have people trying to change how society is at the moment. And we really like this discussion that is going on right now, because in cultural psychology, it have a long tradition studying how societies that have more communal values make people have more interdependent ego identity. For example, if I ask you who you are, and you can think about it, like I'll give you 5 seconds to try to describe yourself, okay? I can say, okay, Juan Diego, I am, I don't know, an uncle, a son, a great Bayern Munich soccer player. Of course, I am not, but I can describe myself like that. But also, I can say I am a professor, a researcher, and great soccer player. So how we describe ourselves is a reflection of how we develop our own identity, our personal identity. This identity can be like more related to others, kind of like interdependent ego identity, or it can be more focused on the individual. So cultural psychology has been explaining how societies with more communal values make people have more interdependent ego identity, like more related to others. And societies that have more individualistic values make people have self-control, more focus on the individual. But when we say like individualistic values, that's not like to be egocentric or narcissist. It just be more focused on the individual or be more focused on the group. So if we look at this graph on the left, we can see how Confucian Asian societies and Latin American societies have less like individualistic values than Western societies, or like more values like relating to others. Okay, and if we look this graph on the right, we can see how Confucian Asian societies develop a ego identity that's more related with other people, like more interdependent ego identity. So, because this is, if we go up, it's more independent self-control. If we go down, it's more interdependent self-control. And this scale here is individualism. So, Confucian societies have a more interdependent self-identity that are related with cultural values that are more focused on the group. So that makes sense, okay? So then we have Western societies, that are the ones here on the green, that have a more ego identity, like more focus on the individual in comparison with the Confucian Asian society, because they're a little bit up in the graph, okay? But then we have Latin American societies, this one with the orange circles. But this is confusing, because then we have collective values in society, but our ego identity is more independent than other societies. So that doesn't make any sense with theory. And there are some different like explanation of why this is happening in Latin America. And we propose that this is because economic inequality. If we live in extreme societies with extreme inequality, people, as I mentioned before, feel not really connected to other ones and have this feeling of perception that we have to compete to other ones in order to survive in society. This is a debate that's not concluded. We are like in this discussion, but this is why we think this is happening, because extreme inequality. And then this is another graph, in this case, power distance. Power distance is the perception that people have about how hierarchical the relations are in their groups, in their societies. For example, how our relationship with our boss, with our family, with our friends, with our peers, and so on. And again, we made this graph, and this is individualism. So countries that are up in the graph have more individualistic values in their societies. A country that come like to the right have more power distance perception. So again, we can see how um, countries, Latin American countries, have lower individualistic values in society, but a great perception of power distance. I mean, great perception that society and relationships are like very hierarchical. But then we can see Germany that have more individualistic values in society, but less power distance perception. And again, we claim this is because extreme levels of economic inequality in Latin America. Um, this is a special case. And then the other reason that we think is important to look at data from Latin America is because we are underrepresented in science. And when we do science, we try to find general process in society, or general process in human minds. Well, especially I am psychologist. So we try to make claims about general results in human beings. But if we just look at the data that are like collected in rich countries, so our science in general, is science from one group of people. It's not science about humankind. And of course, I mean, this is not on purpose. This is because of lack of the funding, of course, you know. But it's important, you know, to diversify our samples in order to do better science. Okay, what do we know by now? Now I'm going to talk about the data analysis that we made. That's what theory and our explanations. In the first study, this is a study that we had to do in a university when the pandemic the COVID pandemic. We have a really, as I said, as I mentioned, we have a really close relation, the university with society, and we received this call from the government to try to understand what was going on. You know, like, so the pandemic started, and we are like the biggest university in the country, and so people ask us, you know, okay, what is happening? You know, and everyone from a different field have to like try to collaborate to try to understand what were we living by then. And then we found that people who perceive more economic inequality evaluate worse how the government managed the pandemic in Latin America, especially if those people think that health inequality is the worst expression of inequality in our countries. And well, we didn't have data from the COVID pandemic, you know, we were like, what is going on, you know? So we didn't have data, so we went to look for secondary data from Latino Barometro, general population. All the studies that I'm going to present this morning are from this database because it's the database that we have with all Latin American countries, so it's easier for us to look at this data. General population, all the countries that speak Spanish, and Brazil, and yeah, pretty much from 2020. This was our dependent variable, how people evaluate how the government managed the pandemic. And this is our independent variable here, our predictor. And as I mentioned, if you paid attention, this is the same measure that Norton and Areli used in the influential article in 2011. They asked people, okay, you have $100, how would you divide this $100 in the 5 groups that are from the population? And we make an index and R, and we make a subjective Gini index. We have some claims, you know, we have some doubts about this measure, but that's going to be a further talk. And then people was asked, like, from all the inequalities that you live in your everyday life, which one do you think is the worst expression of inequality in your country? So we were in an emergency, like a health crisis with the pandemic. So we tried to look which people, which participants answered that health inequality was the worst expression of inequality. And well, we use multi-level analysis. All the data that are going to present are all multi-level analysis because we are always trying to understand what is the relationship between objective inequality and subjective inequality. So multi-level analysis give us this this opportunity and random effects because the variation between countries and the variance between countries. And this graph now, I mean, this was not the principal result. This is a descriptive result, but this is the result that we like more at the moment. You know, like it was not the principal idea that we have, but now when we think about what is going on in Latin America, we are really interested in this graph on the left. And this is because these are the difference between these orange triangles over here are objective inequality, how is inequality in the country. And these circles, the blue ones, are how people perceive inequality. So we can see the gap between perception and real objective inequality in each country. And again, we are looking for patterns in society in Latin America. We're trying to understand how the context has an influence on how people evaluate inequality. So we like this graph better, with this result better. And then we can see, for example, Guatemala has the largest gap. Then we have Panama, and then we have Nicaragua with the largest gap. And now the map is important again because Guatemala's here, Nicaragua's here, and Panama's here. So the countries we have a bigger gap between perception and objective inequality are all from Central America. And if we go back, which are the countries that have the less bigger gap, the smallest gap? And we have Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile, with the gap that's less big. And they are from South America. They are Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. So just by looking at the data, we can see how different areas in Latin America, some one have a bigger gaps in perception and objective inequality than other ones. And also, you know, uh, education in Central America is not as good as it should be, just in saying some diplomatic way. And we also think that this difference between why these three countries here have the less bigger gap is because they have more political socialization in society. And this also can be the reason why we have like smaller gaps here. And well, this is how countries evaluate the pandemic. El Salvador is extreme outlier because the government they have already right now and at that moment with Najib Bukele, but that's a story for another day. And this is how they manage the evaluation how the government managed the pandemic. So we have here a principal result, the result that we were looking, our hypothetical result that we were looking before. So we see how perceived inequality is associated with how people evaluate the pandemic. So more perception, less the evaluation of how good the government managed the pandemic, also health inequality, and also the interaction between perception of inequality and health inequality as the worst expression of inequality in their country. It's easier maybe to see in this graph. So you can see here on the right, these are the people who mention health inequality as the worst expression of inequality. In this go, like if we go to the right, is more perception of inequality. So how people perceive inequality, more perception. So this regression line goes down, saying that people think like how the government managed the pandemic was worse than in comparison with the people that don't think that health inequality is the worst expression of inequality in their country. And this adds some knowledge to a different research line that we have about how dimension of inequality are more important to find effects and social outcomes than just to ask about difference in income or wealth. Because it's more easier for people to justify inequality with meritocratic belief, people deserve the position they have in hierarchy, then believe or then say that it's justified that people based on their income have a different access to health services. So we can find more stronger results in this different dimension of inequality, a specific dimension of inequality in everyday life. Okay, so we have the result with perception of inequality, and then we wanted to see how unfairness evaluation, there's a different construct, develop over time in the region. So we make this analysis over time, and then we try to associate this evaluation of unfairness with different outcomes. First, social and political trust. All these studies, most of them are not published. So if you have any feedback, it will be a great time for me to hear what you think about all of this. But I just wanted to present this one. This is the only one that's published because I am assuming that most of you are in political science. So I guess this will be more appealing to you than Latin America and gaps between Central America and South America and so on. And also the other study that, the other independent variable that we use is perception against crime, because crime is a big issue in our society. Sadly, it's like we have like really pressure trying to understand what happened between inequality, perception of inequality, and perception of safe living in an equal society like the one that we live in. Okay, before I present this data, just a small conceptual clarification. We are not really strong in theory. The theoretical in social psychology is not like our best, let's say, our best theme. I don't know. We're like more focused on methods than in theory for different reasons. But in the people's mind, unfairness evaluation from our perspective are a second process in cognitive minds. First, people have to perceive inequality. Well, there are some people who don't perceive inequality, but people first have to perceive inequality, and then people have to evaluate how inequality is in their countries. But in a second step, to say in some way, first perception, then evaluation. You cannot evaluate if you don't perceive, but perception is not the same, then evaluation. So it's different, two different psychological mechanisms of how inequality is related in cognition. In this evaluation have two constructs that have a huge influence in how people evaluate unfairness in their country or in their society. First, ideologies, because again, people have different ideas of how society works. I mean, we all have ideas of how society works. It can be, meritocratic values, social dominance orientations, system justification. I mean, different ideas of how society works. But again, in this talk, in this research, specific research line, we are focusing on the context. So most of this line of research is focusing on this relation between how people perceive inequality, how inequality is processing in their minds, and how this have an outcome and the evaluation, and then and behavior later on. But that's a different step that's more complicated. But we are here, right? We're trying to understand how the context of Latin America play a role in this path from perception to evaluation of inequality. Okay, so we wanted to describe how uh, people evaluate over time unfairness in Latin America. And also, we also want to test what was the relationship between ideology and social class or objective inequality with unfairness evaluation, because this is what we do in social psychology. Um, okay, so again, the Latinometro from 2019 to 2020, a lot of participants, and this was our dependent variable here. How people evaluate inequality in their countries. As you can see, most people evaluate inequality as unfair. This is very constant over time. Again, we use multi-level, in this case, logistic regression to model time, and we will ordinal model to model individual, social, and ideological variables in these relationships. So again, I mean, this is one of the principal results, but we like this graph a lot, even though I know it can be like difficult to see because there are too many countries. But these are how the evaluation of unfairness develop over time in each country and in general in Latin America. They are all pretty like similar, but we have like two countries that we can highlight from these evaluations. First is Venezuela. This is the blue line, is the unfairness evaluation over time. And then we can see how people was evaluating inequality as unfair. And then with Chavismo came into political scene or like into became public. So this evaluation went down, and then Chavez died, and then this evaluation started to go up again. And then we see also the case of Ecuador, that we have like a huge decline of how people evaluate inequality. We can reason that it has to be with Correa government, that when he got into office or into power, he make big public redistribution policies. And we can see how these two political events can relate with these changes over time in these two countries. But the rest are pretty stable. There is no change over time as in general in Latin America as a whole, just in these two countries. And again, how we are looking for patterns of countries in evaluation of inequality, we found these other two results pretty interesting. First, that Nicaragua is the country in which people evaluate inequality as less unfair over time. And again, it was the country with the biggest gap between perception and objective inequality, and now is the country that believe or evaluate inequality as less unfair. And this is really particular for the political situation that Nicaragua has in this moment. So we need political scientists to try to collaborate with us to give us some idea of why this is happening. And then again, the three countries that evaluate inequality as most unfair, we have again Chile, less bigger gap between perception and objective inequality, Argentina, and now Brazil. Okay, so again, we have some patterns between countries, South American countries, evaluate inequality as most unfair, and then the country that evaluate inequality as less unfair, from Central America, in this case, Nicaragua. When we see the effect of time and evaluation of inequality, we can see how the only two countries that have an increase and evaluation of unfairness were Chile, that we can relate this with this huge social revolt in 2019, and then sadly Costa Rica, that we can relate. Costa Rica, well, it's a beautiful place. I will talk about it another day. We have a lot of social problems, but a beautiful place. Um, we are like the most stable democracy in the region, and we used to have more governments with progressive governments, to say in some way. But now we have a right-wing populist that's changing the way of how politics used to be from the beginning of history as a country. It's changing now with a populist right-wing president that we have. So we are always trying to understand again how this evaluation of inequality are related with social outcomes. You know, we're always trying to see what can we find from these evaluations. And then these are again the countries that over time decrease their evaluation of unfairness. So Chile and Costa Rica evaluate more inequality as more unfair over time, and Argentina, Bolivia, and Ecuador evaluate less unfair inequality over time. And we also can relate this with progressive governments that were in office and some period of time that actually make policies of redistribution. They actually reduce inequality for a concrete period of time in their history. Now, it has changed a little or a lot maybe, but we can relate these results with those political events. Okay, so we are always trying to see ideology and the context in evaluation inequality and outcomes. So well, we always control for sociodemographics. I forgot to tell you something that's very important in this research line. We always control for sociodemographics, ideology, and social class. It's kind of like the classical thing that we have to do, because we have to understand, or what we have to know, if these associations are over and above social class and especially ideology. Most of the time, ideology just take the effect out, you know, it beats all the variability. So these results are over and above ideology and social class. So we always control sociodemographics and ideology. And ideologies in this case are with the theory, you know, because people are more in the right, or people who believe society is meritocratic, justifies more inequality. So all these results go like in line with theory. And this is level 2 variables. Again, this is all with theory, and this is our level 3 variables. I want to highlight two special results from this graph that are kind of like novel in literature, that we are really like trying to make a sense of what is happening. And first, this is the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is an index between education, income, and life expectancy. So as more Human Development Index is in a country, people believe that inequality is more unfair. So this can be tricky, but more education, more understanding of how society works, so people evaluate inequality as more unfair. So nice, good result. But when we see how Human Development Index plays a role over time, the effect goes in the opposite direction. So when people see that the country is doing better, or have the expectation that we'll do better, people start to believe that inequality is more fair. So in general, as a general result, Human Development Index, people evaluate inequality as more unfair, but when the country is doing better, so people start to think that inequality become more fair, so justify more inequality. And we also relate this result with this belief our mobility in society. There's a classic measure in this kind of research, you know, if people in their own come from a different social class and went up, but also if they have the expectation that they will do better in society. So again, when people believe that inequality is going to be, or their country could do better than future, people justify for more inequality. So we have like these two results that are tricky to understand, that are kind of like different, and we want to highlight because we have our hypothesis that is why this is happening. But if you have any idea, I will be really happy to hear what you think about this. Okay, let me see, because I can be talking here all the afternoon. We have to go at some point. Okay, so this is the result that we have with political trust and social trust. This is how we measure political trust with an index between trust and the Congress, the political parties and the judicial system, and social trust with this variable that people can be trust or cannot be trust. So these were our two dependent variables. Um, and these are the results from objective economic inequality. Because, I mean, I assume you know more about this than me. There is a discussion about if objective inequality has really an influence on political trust, because there are different results. There are some articles that claim that there is, there are some articles that claim that there are not. So we compare results from different societies, and this is a really interesting study, I think. So this is objective inequality. And this graph here first, this is the relationship between political trust and objective economic inequality measured with the Gini index. That might be not the best measure of inequality in relation with social psychology, but that was the index that we had at the moment. So even though this result is not significant, we can see a pattern of how as more inequality, less political trust. But we think like this result could be true. It's not, I mean, it's not significant in this data, but we don't have enough statistical power with 18 countries. But it's a pattern, we believe. But when we see this result over time, then we have like enough statistical power. We can see how as inequality develop over time, people have less trust in the political system with objective inequality. And we found the same with social trust. In the case, just seeing the countries, the average of countries, we have a pattern of how, as more inequality, less social trust, and more inequality over time, less social trust in Latin America. So objective inequality plays a role in trust in the region. But we are social psychologists, so of course we are focusing on the individual response and not only on objective economic inequality. And we also found that as people evaluate inequality as most unfair, have less trust in the political system and less trust in one another's. This result is replicated between countries over time, but not just between countries. And we think this is because, as I said, we don't have enough statistical power to make this claim with just 18 countries. But in this line, or for us, we claim that the relation between objective inequality and social outcomes are perception and elaboration of inequality. So subject inequality is the psychosocial mechanism that drive the effects between objective inequality and social outcomes. So we explore if evaluation of unfairness was the mediation variable between objective inequality and political trust and social trust. We know this is correlational data. This is exploratory result. We cannot claim a mediation result with data from their secondary data. We have to manipulate this. But it's also a really, from a perspective, it's a really nice result because it goes with our theory. Unfairness evaluation of inequality is the mediation variable that can explain the relation between objective inequality and political trust and social trust, at least in Latin America. One last story. This is what we are really interested in this one because we are working in this right now, and because this is a really important hot topic in the area, crime, violence, and again, like the university try that the research that we do have an impact on society. So we are always trying to how our basic research can give some answers to the problem that we have. So this is really important from our perspective. Again, the same database, but in this case we have the new wave that was available at that time. I mean, at this time that we are doing the research, that was the wave from 2023, general population, and so on. So in this case, our dependent variable is how people perceive security in their country. And the other variable that we use is economic hardships, because poverty is another big thing in this area of research. It is also a discussion about if the effects that we found are from inequality or for poverty. But it's a theoretical discussion that we can have another day. We think it's because of inequality, because social comparison, but there is a big discussion about it. So we use economic hardship. And I wanted to show you these results over time because, again, we are looking for patterns over time in the region. And we can see how people in general feel really insecure about crime in the country. This is the result between 1.5 and 2, really insecure. But over time, people were feeling more secure. Like you can see how this line goes up into 2015. And this change between 2015 and 2020. Okay. Again, we see injustice evaluation very stable all the time. People believe in Latin America, inequality is very unfair. Even when we add more data, it's still being the same. Then we evaluate the economic hardship. People was responding that they have over time their income was enough to pay their living. But again, in 2015, this pattern started to change. It started to go down until now. Okay, so you can see this here. It was going up and then it changed in 2015. Economic inequality as well was going down, but it changed in 2015, between 2015 and 2020. And so we're always thinking, so what happened? Like what happened between this period of time? So, and our basic hypothesis by the moment is the pandemic. The pandemic was here in the middle, and this changed how social indicators were progressing in Latin America, but now we're going backwards again. And we claim this is because of the pandemic. And this is a result, this is an example of how we try to control for all the variables possible that we can have, because we have to see if our results are really from fairness evaluation of inequality. We are really looking for this one. So people, again, if people evaluate inequality as more unfair, people perceive that are more insecure, or we can say like in the other way around. If people evaluate inequality as more fair, people feel more secure in their societies. And when we see the interaction between economic hardship and injustice evaluation, we can see how people that believe that inequality is just and have enough money are the people who feel more secure, and people who evaluate inequality as less unfair and have less money are the people who perceive crime to be a serious issue. Um, and this is a powerful message to give in Latin America because politicians always play a role with crime. And the basic policy is to make all the criminals go into jail. But we know that that doesn't resolve the problem. But they receive votes when they claim this all loud. Like they all take this criminal, we are going to put all in jail, and they want to resolve it. And people want that to recover control over their life. People go and vote for them. So we could claim that in order for people to feel more safe where we live, people also have to evaluate that the inequality in their society is more fair. And this can be a powerful message. But, as social scientists, not everything goes perfect, of course, and we have a really small R square result. The variability that we can explain with this model is really tiny. I mean, we have all, so in psychology, we have tiny R squares, but we can explain it's very small, but in this case, it's particularly small. So we want to go like behind this line, but this is what we have by now. And at the moment, we are trying to manipulate evaluation of unfairness because this is all descriptive data. There are associations, we cannot claim causal relationship, and we have to take, be more humble with the results. So we are trying to manipulate evaluation of unfairness. We have been pretty successful before manipulating perception of inequality. Well, with unfairness evaluation, we are not doing pretty well at the moment. We are trying different ways of how we can make people in a specific point of time evaluate inequality as more fair or more unfair, and then measure another things.